We'll continue your prayers for Afghanistan and Haiti, for those in the path of Ida, the destruction, the flooding that's all gone on. There's certainly a lot of things to be in prayer about. Today received word that a very young, nice man that I performed his wedding ceremony has gone to be with the Lord, and that's a sad, sad note because he's a young man and leaves behind a young wife and two young children, and certainly a sad time as I think back on what a nice couple they were and how much I enjoyed doing their counseling and their wedding. So a lot of things to be praying about, a lot of things to be thankful for, and we need to pray for everybody that's contracted the COVID. There are a number of people that we know very personally that are fighting COVID, and some that have won and some that have lost. Here in Landrum, a very sweet lady, Janie Lee, still in the hospital with the COVID, although seems to be making good progress towards recovery. Hard to determine what's going to happen when you get the COVID. Many people bounce back quickly, others take weeks, months, and some don't come through it at all. They succumb to the COVID. So we just need to continue to pray and to be as careful as we possibly can around others, because we can carry it, evidently, from what science is telling us. So we need to do all that we can to protect one another. And that's a very delicate balance. As I talked with our pastor here at Landrum, we don't want to forsake the assembling of ourselves, but at the same time, we don't want to pass on the COVID to one another. And so I would encourage you, if you're not able to safely go to church and wear a mask and so on, that you at least watch your church services on the streaming devices that are now available to us, and be able to continue to worship, even though it's not a corporate worship. It certainly is still studying God's Word and hearing God's Word, and we know that God honors that. So I encourage you to try to be in person if you think that it's safely available to you, but if not, to at least watch it on the streaming devices so that you don't leave God out of your life, and continue with your daily devotions as well. We're still in the book of Genesis, and we've been looking at God's creation account, one that he likely dictated to Moses when Moses was up on Mount Sinai, one that Moses probably was curious, how did this all begin, God? And God dictated to him how he created. And we know that God was before, is now, and always will be. He's eternal. But he does give us an account of his creation. It's not a science book. It's not a history book. But it is an account of his creation. In chapter 1 of the book of Genesis, we see his sovereignty and his power of creation. In chapter 1, verses 3 through 13, we see the creation of the order of what would be necessary to sustain life. So he took what was in total chaos and disarray, and he created it in such a way with light and with water so that life could be sustained before he created life. And then he, in verses 14 through 19, created the solar system. According to the scientists, 300 sextillion stars and planets in the solar system, and yet God says he flung them into space and put them in perfect orbit, and certainly better than any orbits we've ever put our satellites in. And then in verses 20 through 23, we see the creation of sea life, bird life, with the ability to reproduce. Now listen carefully, because there's some phrases that I've told you to watch for. As a matter of fact, let me mention them all again now. God said. Interesting that he spoke things into existence. And it was so is another phrase that we see repeated. And it was good. And God created a good universe. And it also tells us that he created light and darkness so that we could save morning to evening one day. It certainly defies the creation of the heavens and the earth in billions of years or through a great blast of swirling gas masses. And he says that he created animal and plant life after its own kind, and animals with the ability to reproduce after their own kind, plants with seeds so that they could produce after their own kind. And so we see this creation account, verses 24 through 25. We see animal life. We see some very interesting animal life created. And again, it's given the ability to produce after its kind. I think that's very important. We have all of these theories about evolution, and yet God says he created not so that they would evolve from one thing to another, but he created after its own kind and gave it the reproduction capability to create after its kind. So today we're going to look at verses 26 and 27. And I think you're going to really enjoy these verses all the way through verse 28 as we look at God's next day of creation. Drum roll, please. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over the earth, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth, subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." Interesting, isn't it? Not after its own kind, but in the image of God, in his likeness. A special creation to rule over all of the rest of creation, the earth and all the living creatures on the earth. And he created them male and female, not 27 varieties, not 27 variations on a particular sex, but male and female. And God blessed them. He said, "Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth." Now science says that there are 6 kingdoms of animal life, or life I should say, and 9 major phylums, a number of classes, but there's no indication of evolution. They have some common structures, it's true, but there's no evidence and no current ongoing evolution from a mollusk to a primate. Isn't it interesting that science still swears that we evolved, and yet they themselves, when they classify all of these kingdoms and all of these phyla, they classify in such a way that there's no in-between stages. They show them that they are created after their own kind, and they put them in classes. They put them in kingdoms. They put them in categories that are after their own kind, not evolutionary. Well, science says we ought to follow science when it comes to the virus. I wonder why science doesn't follow science when it comes to God's creation. Very, very interesting. It deserved a drum roll, although that really wasn't a drum roll, it was really a nuclear blast. Didn't have a drum roll in my sound effects. I thought it was better than a car horn anyway. Well, I hope you're having a great day. I hope that you'll continue to pray for all of those that need our prayers, and I hope that you'll just stop and meditate on the greatness of God's creation and how he created man in his own image and in his own likeness, that we would have rule and dominion over all of the other things that he created. That's my thought for the day. God bless you and have a great day. Well, let's continue to pray for all of those in those places.